Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. It's a very bold announcement, you know, and it was really meant to usher in a new religion. On the other hand, evoking Jesus and evoking that kind of religiosity is also a statement of intent. It's like, what I do want is that level of meaning and intensity. You know, I just want it to accomplish different things. I don't want it to become, you know, a club that you use to beat people over the head or to repress them. I want liberation, you know, and this is going to be my means. So I'm opting out of your system. I think that was the message right there.
You get songs like that have been covered by everyone and their brother, so to speak, but it's an entirely new way of doing it. You cover the song, but it's just a sort of loose framework on which to hang your own ideas and stretching it out, elongating it, adding her own lyrics. That's something that most people wouldn't even have thought of. You know, they just cover it. They might change the production or the sound or the speed or something, but to just use it as a sort of coat hanger for your own concepts. So that's what struck me when I heard it.
In a way, it's very like people sampling records now. You know, who knows what would have happened if Patti Smith had had access to a sampler way back in 1975. Might have sounded very different, and in many ways it's no different to what people are doing now, except they're sampling the actual sound rather than covering the record. There's also the androgynous aspect of, you know, Patti singing a song to Gloria. You know, she's singing a song to a female love object. There were more than lesbian undertones. There, you know, she was definitely promoting this androgynous gay aesthetic in the early days. And there was so little about for gay men and gay women to hang on to that wasn't part of the commercial scene. But there was so little for anybody to hang on to anyway, that even these scraps had a huge impact. And certainly later went on to people like Susie, who has a huge gay following and had a huge gay following at the time. And although the gay side of punk was quite buried, it was definitely there. And Patti Smith was very, very important in that.
Indeed, homosexual photographer Robert Mapplethorpe, both a close friend and former lover of Patti Smith's, captured this blurring of gender with the horse's cover shot. Smith's monochrome uniform, complete with a Keith Richards hairstyle, was as much of a statement as the music itself.
Redondo Beach is a beach where women love other women.
With this kind of very powerful androgynous sexuality that she represented, as I think, trying to almost restore a kind of meaning to sexuality. You know, sexuality is a rebellious act, and sexuality as a path to freedom.
It was a different kind of sexuality, and as sexuality, it was subdued. You would never say she was anti-sex or non-sexual, but neither was she sexy. Tina Turner, Janis Joplin, they were sexy. Not the way Marilyn Monroe was sexy, but sexy nevertheless. She wasn't. And to my way of thinking, that's very sexy.
Just as Patti Smith had blurred the lines of sexuality, so she merged the genres of music, setting the clipped rhythms of the reggae beat within a rock context for the unusual crossover sound of Redondo Beach.
Say, looking back on it, she was maybe one of the first people doing mashes, but not even knowing it. I mean, she would take a conventional track and just plop her thing on top of it, you know, and it could be a track like a reggae track, traditional reggae with the whole, you know, the drums and everything right and traditional about what a reggae song should be, and she would just plop what she does on top of it. One of the tracks that I think was really groundbreaking was Birdland, okay, because of just what was in it poetry-wise, but the whole entire mood of it.
Yeah, it's just the kind of thing that you just didn't hear anywhere else, and still really don't hear anywhere else.
Birdland was the first on that album of the two main centerpieces, the two epics, where the music, it just builds up in a sort of trance-like fashion over a repeated refrain of like 3 or 4 chords, piano-led chords. It was inspired by, I think, a dream she had about Peter Reich, who was the son of Wilhelm Reich, who wrote the book about the mass psychology of fascism and functions of the orgasm, I think, as well. Sex and death all bound up in one thing. And in this dream, Peter, or in the Book of Dreams, Peter Reich's Book of Dreams, he sort of imagined his father coming down and then being taken off by aliens again. And Patti Smith has this line in there, "You're not human, we're not human, I'm not human." This chimes in with her sense of being this outsider as a young child, and that she felt that she was in touch with kind of some alien supernatural forces. So that, I think, is what really gives that song its power.
Patti Smith sort of gets into her mode. There's almost a kind of glossolalia about what she's doing. It's a kind of poetic reverie that she achieves, that where sense just disappears, and it's all about the sound and all about the words.
Patti came in and did vocals starting at about 4 or 5 in the morning, just when it was perfectly right to do a vocal, okay? When you listen to a vocal like Birdland, you'll understand how the nighttime is conducive to that kind of vocal. And a lot of those vocals on there are conducive to the night. And it was the mood that was in Electric Lady at 4 o'clock in the morning, when the murals came alive and the spirit of Hendrix might have been in the hallway. I mean, it was just a spirit that was there. And a lot of people will say the same thing about that studio. There was a spirit that was a very creative spirit that people would plug into right away. And stuff that would come up just on the spur of the moment was something that the gods were giving you. That's the kind of thing, and that's what Patti tapped into. She tapped into that. The band basically was kind of green at the time. I mean, they had great musical ability, but it wasn't harnessed as of yet. There was a lot of stuff done on site. In other words, working out parts, and as they were gigging, they were getting tighter as a band and as a unit.
With Horses, I think it's one of the sort of the great debut albums, for the simple fact that they had blueprints for all the songs, but then I think as they just so happened to appear in the studio in collaboration with John Cale, they became sort of the unique collection of songs that makes the album in the end. Yeah, the choice of John Cale as a producer, on paper it seemed absolutely classic. You know, he kind of, her alternative view of rock and roll, the Velvet Underground, garage rock, you know, the Stooges, Nico, Cale had produced and worked with, or an integral part of the Velvet Underground. So he really seemed on paper to be the right person.
I'll be honest with you, I don't think there could have been a Horses album without John Cale. I mean, if John wasn't involved, it would have been a completely different record, okay? And John's style of producing wasn't, it wasn't like everyone else's. John had his own way of producing this particular record. Was it sitting up in bright lights and, paying attention to every little detail? No, it wasn't, but it was him feeling the music in a place of his own, which I said was his cubby hole under the console, and he would basically talk to Patti with a microphone in his hand under the console, and he would relay that information out to her. And I think by her not seeing John, just hearing him, I think that made a lot of difference, because basically when you looked into the studio, you couldn't really see me or Bernie. And John you couldn't see, so she felt like she was out there alone, but she was hearing communication coming in. So that, I think, helps a singer to really get to a place where they don't have to worry about impressing anybody or doing something that they want to try, but maybe thinking someone wouldn't like it, okay? This was something to really be able to let go. And that's why I think nobody could have did this except John Cale.
I think he's a psychological producer, I think. He knows what's going in that other person's mind. And I think he wanted to push Patti Smith further. And that was, for someone who's really not taken orders from people for a long, long time, since she left the factory, that was quite a difficult thing for Patti Smith to digest. But in terms of creativity and art, it really, really worked.
He was pushing them to take the music as far as possible. I mean, a track like Birdland, I think, was originally about 4 minutes whenever they were rehearsing it and had first written it. And it was under sort of John Cale's instruction that the song was pushed to, its final 9-minute version. And I think a lot of his sort of manic energy is also behind driving Land to where it went. And Land is very much it's the most cinematic track on Horses. There's something very imagistic about it as a song. There are stories. It's very visual, and in a way, it's almost like spoken word that happens to have this soundtrack to it. Rather than, at the time, you can't really say there's any rock and roll song that, as a precedent, that sounds anything like Land. It's completely different, and probably since that record, there are probably many examples of bands and artists that have sort of tried to do something that is as experimental as Land, but I don't think anything really succeeds in kind of somehow harnessing something that's quite elaborate in its structure and improvised, but at the same time sounds as if it was completely scripted.
That's Patti Smith's masterpiece in that whole 30 or so year career. That's her call to rock and roll. That's her actually almost physically pumping the heart of rock and roll, massaging it back to life again. The boy looked at Johnny. Johnny is like the symbol of rock and roll, who kind of died. He was there at the beginning. It was Johnny B. Goode, Chuck Berry. Bye Bye Johnny, Chuck Berry. It was Johnny in William Burroughs' The Wild Boys, Pulp Fiction. Johnny was everywhere. Johnny was rock and roll, but Johnny had kind of been shunted off to the sidelines by the early 70s. And she brought him back, alive and screaming and kicking and stabbing, on that record. And that is really the pure mix of rock and poetry at its best.
Along comes this artist who says, I'm a girl. All you girls, stand up, And I mean, this really happened. And it really worked. And millions of girls all over the world heard this clarion call. And, that's a terrific thing to do. That's enough for a whole lifetime to be proud of.
All of the elements were there, I think, for anybody looking for a new direction, in rock and roll. Horses made that statement.
When they were first doing Patti Smith, everyone was like scratching their head, wondering, what is this going to be? Nobody had any preconceived notions of what this was going to be. This was something totally new. And when the record was delivered, everybody said, oh my God, this just changed everything. And it certainly did.
If you just put it on and listen to it today, it still conveys so much kind of visceral force. It still seems kind of outside the structure of what music is. It still seems such an individual statement.